Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala gets on the verge of leading the World Trade Organization, WTO, Chinemerem Joseph in this report takes a look at her antecedents and what trade benefits Nigeria and Africa would stand to gain.
The path has been cleared for Nigeria's former Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, to become the first woman and the first African to lead the World Trade Organization after South Korea's female candidate pulled out of the race for the job. Okonjo-Iweala, a development economist and two-time finance minister in Nigeria, already enjoyed broad support from WTO members, including the European Union, China, Japan, and Australia. During her 25 years at the World Bank as a development economist, she is credited with spearheading several initiatives to assist low-income countries, raising nearly $50 billion in 2010 from donors for the International Development Association, the World Bank's fund for the poorest countries.
They didn't have enough money to take.
She takes more pride in reforms she implemented back home. A very prominent was when she led a team which negotiated an $18 billion debt write-off in 2005, which helped Nigeria obtain its first ever sovereign debt rating. She is also credited with developing programs that helped improve transparency in government and stabilizing the economy. A key objective of the WTO is a liberalization of trade for the mutual benefit of its 164 members, which Okonjo-Iweala is expected to use her position to drive. This concept has, however, become a divisive issue as a result of the perceived imbalance in the rights and obligations of members and the perceived uneven distribution of the gains from trade. But what will her appointment mean for Nigeria and Africa? Although the job is a difficult one, it is an opportunity for Nigeria to play a big role in implementing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This, all things being equal, might be the biggest geographical trading bloc in the world. As the leader of the WTO, Okonjo-Iweala can ensure that Africa is not left out of important discussions and policies, especially due to the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As the fastest growing continent in the world, Africa's population will also be important to the global economy as countries accelerate from their current low base. Chinemerem Joseph, Arise News.
Thank you. And joining us now to take a look at this, all the development around the WTO and of course Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is LEONARD UGBJA, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy. Good to have you, Mr. UGBJA.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
All right. For the next 4 years, hopefully we'll have Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to lead the business and affairs of WTO. What are your expectations, in terms of the tasks ahead of her?
Well, as we all know, the WTO at this moment is in a crisis moment. Not just the crisis of leadership, that's just one of the manifestations of the overall crisis. The major crisis is the crisis of what the members want the WTO to be. For example, the US is looking at a WTO that serves the American interests better. So that means reforms in areas such as the way the appellate body of the WTO works, what they can decide, and how much intrusion, if you like to use that word, into the domestic affairs of member states.
Well, maybe if you had said, sorry to, bump in here, maybe if we had said this some less than a month ago during the tenure of Donald Trump, yes, the world would have agreed with you. Yeah. But there seems to be a changing scenario here, a synergy from the American, leadership that aligns with the wishes of the WTO.
Yes, so the problems are there, but then the approach to solving the problems. So like the approach of Trump is different from obviously what Biden is coming with, but the issues remain the same. So how much power should the WTO have over the domestic affairs of member states? Now, while you have countries like the EU who are, if you like, incorrigibly multilateral, so they like to bring everybody together and forge multilateral solutions. The US under Trump wasn't that, but Biden, of course, is pro-multilateralism. Now, but beyond that, you have problems dealing with the position of developing countries within the WTO. So developing countries are asserting their demand for more flexibility on the rules. For example, one of the most thorny issues is the issue of agriculture subsidy. So while the developed countries have maintained their system of subsidy over the years, which many will say is unfair, now the developing countries led by countries like China and India are asking for a relaxation of those rules on subsidy, because they think it's unfair. So there's been a deadlock, and this deadlock is why the Doha round that was started over 15 years ago has not been completed up to now. So inherently, the WTO is in a crisis position. So any leader who is coming in right now would have a very broad view of what the issues are and be able to profile solutions to them. So for example, how are you going to go into the MC12 later in the year? They will have the ministerial conference, the 12th one in Kazakhstan. Now, how are you going to move on the issue? Are we going to say, for example, we are no longer dealing with Doha round that was supposed to address the fundamental issues that the developing countries were interested in?
Okay, Leonard, let me put you on pause there because we want to take some commercial messages. It's a trading post here too. All right, it's time for a short break. We'll continue the conversation when we return. You stay with us. You're welcome back, and you're still watching Newsnight Nigeria. We're live in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Christian Ogodo.
And I am Amaka Okoye.
Okay, we still have Mr. Emmanuel UGBJA, who is the Executive Director, Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy. Before we went on break, we were talking about the Doha Agreement some 1.5 decades ago, and you were interrogating the question, is that agreement going to be discarded for the reformation of the WTO? Do you think that agreement can still be sustainable?
Well, just a point of correction. The Doha isn't an agreement.
Yeah.
So it was the Doha, like you have in WTO, you have rounds of negotiations. So
absolutely.
Doha round is what it means is that the members come together and they agree on issues to be negotiated. So it's a negotiating round. So and then the negotiation is supposed to lead to an agreement. But as it were right now, that negotiation has gone on for many years and stalled now. And some of us believe actually that Doha round is dead. But there has been no formal pronouncement from the WTO to say we are discarding the Doha round. And it may interest you to know that Doha round was christened the Doha Development Round because it was aimed to address the imbalances from the Uruguay round where WTO was formed, the negotiations that happened at that time. So the developing countries demanded for a rebalancing. That gave rise to the Doha round. But now, nobody...
But let me just quickly interject here.
Okay.
Whether agreement or no agreement, they discussed to reach certain, concessions,
yes,
right?
Correct.
But where would be Africa in the scheme of things, and Nigeria particularly in, Dr. Konjo-Iweala assuming that high position?
Well, just to know that, first of all, her position is she's serving on a personal capacity, not representing any country or any region. That should be important. Should be noted importantly. So Nigeria has its representative at the WTO, not Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, anybody. But now her role, informally, of course, she can influence a lot of things. For example, the issues that are of most interest to developing countries could gain more attention because she could put them more on the agenda. So it's mostly about setting the agenda.
And for Africa, what would that be? Because we talked about human and material resources untapped in abundance. So with the Africa Free Trade Continental Trade Agreement coming into effect, how would Africa use that, you understand, to get a lot of concessions and agreements here with the WTO?
Okay, so for Africa, what are the most topical issues for us at the WTO? For example, the issue of MSMEs. How can we get medium and small enterprises to trade more in the global trading system? That's important to Africa. And there are some moves already in WTO about that. There's also the issue of integrating gender issues in the global trading system. It's also ongoing. Now, for the AFCFTA, look at it this way, that the AFCFTA, in a way, is Africa's response to the uncertainty in the global trading system. So we're saying if out there the condition is very uncertain, then we can as well consolidate trading among ourselves. Then when we succeed in consolidating to a very high extent, then we can have a common voice in speaking at the WTO. Because basically in the WTO, it's about negotiation, it's about power. It's about how much clout you can wield. That's why just the US stalled the appointment of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Just India stalled the early adoption of the Trade Facilitation Agreement in 2014. Okay. Just India stalled it. You know, so if Africa comes together by virtue of trading together and consolidating the AfCFTA, then we'll be able to speak with greater authority at the WTO. And that means we can place demands and get what we want.
Fantastic. Thanks so very much. LEONARD UGBJA, he's the Executive Director, Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy, for coming on Newsnight.
You're welcome.